Apache scout led soldiers to water, until they pointed their rifles at his sister. The Apache scout carried his sister's bread into the desert, and left her behind in the dust. Cowboy had walked 12 days without water. His lips were split like cracked earth. His tongue, swollen and heavy, pressed against the roof of his mouth like a stone. The cavalrymen behind him, 12 men in faded blue wool, sunburnt and sour with sweat, had stopped asking for water 3 days ago. They only stared at his back now, eyes hollow as empty canteens. He knew what they thought. That he was a guide. A tool. A savage who led them to life so they could take it from him later. He found it just after dawn, when the sky turned the color of rust. Beneath a slab of black basalt, half buried by windswept sand, a thin seam of moisture wept from the rock. It pooled in a cupped depression no wider than a man's palm. One drop fell every 10 seconds. Slow. Deliberate. Sacred. Cowboy knelt. He didn't drink. Not yet. He cupped his hands beneath the drip, let the cold kiss his skin, then poured it slowly into his gourd. He remembered his mother's voice, low and steady, whispering to him as a boy, "Water is the breath of the earth. Take only what you need. Honor it, or it will turn on you." He filled the gourd 3 times. Then he turned. The soldiers surged forward like jackals scenting carrion. Boots kicked up dust. Canteens clanked. One man shoved another aside, knocking a rifle into the dirt. They fell upon the trickle like starving wolves. Their laughter rose, hoarse, broken, mad, with each swallow. For the first time in weeks, they breathed easy. Cowboy watched. His chest ached. He hadn't brought them here for glory. Not for pay. He'd done it because Nita had begged him. Go, she'd said that morning, her fingers trembling as she pressed a small loaf of cornbread into his hand. They are lost. Even the ones who carry guns are lost. If you lead them to water, maybe God will forgive us. He hadn't believed in God since the fever took his father. But he believed in her. So he led them east, past the dead mesquite and the bones of long-dead buffalo, until they reached the edge of his people's hidden camp, a cluster of hide lodges nestled in the crook of a canyon, smoke curling thin from 2 fires. Women stirred stew. Children played with carved sticks. An old man sat beneath a cottonwood, humming a song older than the riverbeds. And there she was. Nita. She stepped forward before anyone else moved. Her dress was frayed at the hem. Her hair, braided tight, held a single feather dyed red with berry juice. In her hands, cracked palms, calloused from kneading dough, she held out the last loaf of bread. Not for herself. Not for her mother, dying inside the lodge. For them. The soldiers paused. One spat. Another laughed. The captain, a thick-necked man with a scar running from temple to jaw, stepped forward. He looked at the bread. Looked at her. Looked at Cowboy. "You got food?" he asked. Nita nodded. Quiet. Brave. The captain smiled. Not cruel. Not kind. Just, satisfied. He reached out. Took the bread. Held it high. "Look at this," he barked. "A little savage girl feeds us like angels." Laughter rolled through the men again. Louder this time. Boisterous. Proud. Then the captain lowered the loaf. And raised his revolver. The shot cracked like thunder over dry grass. It wasn't loud. Not compared to the cannon fire they'd heard in battle. But it was final. Nita staggered back. Her eyes wide. Not with fear. With confusion. As if she couldn't understand why the hand that took her bread would now take her life. Cowboy didn't move. Didn't scream. Didn't blink. The bread fell. Crumbled in the dust. Blood bloomed dark across her chest. Slow. Thick. Like ink in water. Behind him, one soldier whispered, "Jesus Christ," another muttered, "She didn't even run." The captain reloaded. Calm. Methodical. As if shooting a girl offering bread was nothing more than reloading a carbine. Cowboy turned. Walked away. No one followed. No one called him back. The wind picked up, swirling dust into spirals that danced like ghosts over the canyon floor. Somewhere, a child began to cry. A woman sang a lullaby too soft to hear. And Cowboy kept walking. Until the last drop of mercy ran dry. He didn't cry. Crying was a luxury for people who still had home. Cowboy walked until his feet bled through the cracks in his moccasins. He didn't stop to rest. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep, not truly. He moved like a shadow stitched to the earth, guided not by memory, but by the scent of gunpowder clinging to the wind. The soldiers hadn't gone far. They'd camped that first night at the edge of the salt flats, where the ground cracked open like the skin of a dried-out beast. They'd drunk deep from the spring Cowboy had shown them. Laughed over stolen rations. Played cards with bones for chips. One man even sang a hymn, off-key, trembling, with tears running down his cheeks. "We're saved," he'd slurred. "By God's grace, and that little Apache girl." Cowboy heard it all from the ridge above. He watched them light fires under stars so bright they hurt to look at. Watched as the captain, his face lit orange by flame, pulled Nita's bread crust from his pocket and held it up like a relic. "This," he said, voice thick, "is what mercy looks like." Then he threw it into the fire. Cowboy didn't move. Not then. Not when the men slept, snoring like wounded animals. Not when the coyotes came, drawn by the smell of blood still fresh on their boots. He waited. Until the moon dipped low. Until the last ember died. Then he slipped down like smoke. He took their canteens first. Empty ones. Then the full ones. He poured the water onto the salt, letting it vanish into the thirsty earth. Let the men wake to thirst again, worse than before. Let them beg the desert for mercy they'd refused to give. On the second night, he stole their boots. One by one. Left them stacked neatly beside each sleeping man's head. When they woke barefoot, screaming, stomping on the razor-sharp salt, he stood just beyond sight, watching. One soldier screamed about demons. Another wept, clawing at his blistered heels. The captain, his face swollen with rage, swore he'd hang every Indian within 50 miles. Cowboy smiled then. For the first time since the shot. He knew what hunger felt like. Now they would too. He left signs only his people understood. A broken arrow, pointed east, where the sun rose on the day they killed her. 3 stones shaped like a woman kneeling, arms outstretched. Ashes scattered in the shape of a heart, pierced by a single bullet hole. At dawn, 3 days later, one of the soldiers went mad. His name was Eli. A farm boy from Ohio. Had 2 sisters back home. One was sickly. He wrote letters to her every month. He found himself staring at the horizon for hours, whispering, "She was singing. I heard her singing." No one believed him. Until the next morning, when they found him curled beneath a rock, mouth full of salt, tongue blackened, eyes wide open, and clutched in his fist, a single strand of dark hair. Nita's hair. They buried him that night without a prayer. The captain ordered the rest to keep moving. But something had changed. The men no longer laughed. No longer joked. They spoke in whispers. Avoided each other's eyes. Refused to drink from the same canteen. One night, after the fire died, a private named Harlan turned to the captain and said, quiet as snowfall, "You think she was afraid?" The captain didn't answer. Harlan kept talking. I saw her face. When you shot her. She didn't scream. Didn't curse. Just looked, surprised. Like she thought you'd thank her. Silence swallowed the words. And then, the wind. It came sudden, sharp, cold as a blade. And for just a breath. They all heard it. A child's voice, singing softly. Bread is life, water is love. It wasn't coming from anywhere. It was inside their skulls. That night, 2 men deserted. They vanished into the dunes. No one looked for them. They knew. The land remembered. And it was hungry. Cowboy followed them anyway. Not to kill. Not yet. To make them remember. Every step they took now, he walked behind. Every drop of sweat they lost, he drank from the same puddle. Every time they closed their eyes, he was there. In the dream. In the dust. In the silence between heartbeats. He didn't need revenge. Revenge was loud. This was worse. This was the slow unraveling of a soul. And he was the thread pulling it apart. The widow didn't know his name. She only knew the silence he carried. It came to her door 3 weeks after the soldiers passed through Hollow Creek, a town that had forgotten its own name, let alone the men who rode through it like storms. She was scraping lard from a tin when she heard the boot scrape stone outside. Not the heavy tread of a drunk or the clomp of a sheriff's boots. This was quiet. Measured. Like a man walking on broken glass and not feeling it. She opened the door. He stood there, tall, thin as a winter branch, skin darkened by sun and sorrow. His eyes were hollow, yes, but not empty. There was something in them, something older than grief. Something that had watched too many graves open and close. In his hands, a gourd, half full of water. Clear. Cool. Glinting in the late afternoon light. He said nothing. Just held it out. Ilara stared at it. Then at him. Then at the ground where his shadow fell, long, trembling, like a ghost still learning how to stand. She didn't take it. Not right away. You're the one, she whispered. He didn't nod. Didn't shake his head. But his fingers twitched. Just once. She remembered the story. Told by the blacksmith's boy, who'd seen the soldiers ride in with blood on their boots and a girl's hair tucked in their saddlebags. They killed her, the boy had said. For bread. Ilara had buried her husband 3 days before that. Fever took him fast. Left her with nothing but a cracked pot, 2 chickens, and a prayer that God hadn't forgotten her too. Now here was a man who'd walked through hell to bring her water. And he didn't ask for food. Didn't ask for shelter. Didn't even ask for thanks. She stepped back. Come in, she said. He didn't move. So she reached out. Took the gourd. Her fingers brushed his. Cold. Dry. Scarred. She closed her hand around it. Then she shut the door. That night, she sat by the fire, cradling the gourd like a baby. She drank slow. Let the water slide down her throat like a blessing she didn't deserve. Outside, the wind whistled through the eaves. A lone coyote called, once, twice, and then silence. At dawn, she baked. Used the last of her flour. The last of her salt. The last of her hope. 1 loaf. Small. Dark. Crusted. She wrapped it in calico, the same cloth she'd used to bury her husband. Left it on the porch. Beside the gourd. Empty now. She didn't wait. Didn't peek through the crack in the shutter. Didn't listen for footsteps. She just sat by the window, staring at the horizon where the desert met the sky, and waited. Hours passed. No sound. No movement. Then, a breeze. Not hot. Not dry. Sweet. Like wheat baking in an oven. Like fresh dough rising under warm hands. She turned. There, on the porch, the bread was gone. The gourd was full again. Water gleamed inside. And beside it, a single red feather. Tied with a thread of sinew. Nita's feather. Ilara didn't scream. Didn't cry. She walked outside. Kneeled. Pressed her forehead to the dirt. And whispered, "Thank you." That night, she baked again. 2 loaves this time. 1 for the living. 1 for the dead. She left them both on the step. And when morning came, the bread was untouched. Still warm. Still whole. As if someone had taken a bite, and then stopped. Because they couldn't eat it. Because eating it would mean forgetting. And forgetting was worse than hunger. The next day, a child from the edge of town ran up to her, eyes wide. "Mama says you got visited by a spirit." Ilara smiled faintly. "No," she said. "Just a man who remembers." She never saw him again. But every morning, rain or shine, she baked. And every morning, the bread disappeared. And every evening, the gourd filled itself. No one else noticed. No one else dared speak of it. But sometimes, when the wind died and the world went still, the people of Hollow Creek swore they could smell it. Bread. Fresh. Warm. Sweet. Like love refused to die. And if you listened real close, you could hear a whisper. Not in your ears. In your bones. "I gave you water. You gave me death. Now I give you peace." They didn't die together. They died one by one. Like leaves falling from a tree no one remembers planting. The captain kept them moving, north, toward the rumored gold in the Black Hills. He said it was redemption. Said they'd find fortune and wash their sins clean with silver. But his eyes had gone dull. Like glass filled with ash. He no longer spoke to the men. No longer gave orders. Just rode, stiff-backed, staring at nothing, his fingers constantly touching the holster where his revolver used to hang. Kawa followed. Not as a hunter. As a witness. He watched the first man break on the 3rd day past the salt flats. His name was Silas. A former preacher. Had a Bible stitched into his saddlebag. Told stories of angels who walked among sinners. Now he slept with his face pressed into the dirt, mumbling scripture backwards. One morning, he woke screaming about fire, and how Nita's voice was singing through it. "She says you're not forgiven," he cried. "She says you're already dead." They buried him that night without a shovel. Used rocks. Covered him with thorn brush. No prayer. No hymn. Just silence. 2 days later, the second man vanished. Harlan. The one who'd heard the song. They found his boots near a dry creek bed. Empty. Filled with sand. His rifle lay beside them, barrel bent like a broken spine. His skin was cracked open like sun-baked clay. His tongue, gone. Swallowed by thirst, or something worse. The remaining 5 stopped talking. They ate less. Slept less. Drank less. And every night, when the fire dimmed, they all turned their backs to the west. Because that's where she died. And that's where he came from. Kawa didn't kill them with bullets. He killed them with memory. He stole the captain's compass one night and buried it beneath a stone shaped like a weeping woman. The next morning, the captain swore the stars had moved. That the wind whispered her name in every gust. One soldier, young and trembling, began carving symbols into his arm with his knife. Not crosses. Not initials. Shapes like feathers. Like bread. Like water dripping from rock. He called it her language. He died 3 nights later. Smiling. The last 2 men split off at the canyon pass. They thought they could outrun him. Thought they could hide in the hills. They were wrong. Kawa found them in an abandoned mine shaft, half dead, gnawing on their own boots for moisture. He didn't speak. Didn't raise a weapon. Just sat across from them on a pile of rusted ore, watching as their lips cracked and bled. Hours passed. Then one of them, the youngest, choked out, "Why don't you kill us?" Kawa looked at him. Slowly. Like a man remembering his own childhood. Then he reached into his coat. Took out Nita's prayer beads. Made of bone and dried berry husks. Tied with sinew. He laid them gently on the ground between them. The boy stared. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I didn't know." Kawa stood. Walked away. Behind him, the boy picked up the beads. Pressed them to his chest. Screamed until his voice broke. The other man. He just stared at the dark mouth of the mine. And whispered, "We should have let her live." They never left the shaft. When the cavalry sent a search party weeks later, they found 2 skeletons curled together like lovers. In the younger man's hand, the prayer beads. On the wall, scratched into the rock with a fingernail, "She gave us bread. We gave her death." Kawa didn't go back to check. He knew. He'd done what he came to do. But he wasn't finished. He went to the chapel. The one the soldiers had desecrated on their way north. It was half collapsed now. Roof gone. Pews splintered. The altar cracked open, spilling dust where holy books once lay. Inside, hanging crooked above the pulpit, a mirror. Glass fogged with age. Dust coated its frame. Kawa stepped forward. Stood before it. Looked into his own reflection. Gaunt. Hollow-eyed. Skin stretched over bone. And behind him, there she was. Nita. Barefoot. In her red-dyed dress. Hair still braided. Blood dried on her chest like a rose petal. She didn't smile. Didn't cry. Just looked at him. With those quiet, knowing eyes. The kind that forgive even when you don't deserve it. Kawa didn't move. Didn't reach for her. Didn't speak. He just bowed his head. And whispered, "I'm sorry." The mirror trembled. Then cleared. And in its surface, for the first time since the desert took her, he saw himself. Not as a killer. Not as a ghost. But as a brother. As a son. As a man who loved too much to let hate live inside him. Outside, the wind stirred. A horse snorted. Not wild. Not feral. Familiar. Kawa turned. There, at the chapel door, a mare stood. Black as midnight. No saddle. No bridle. Just eyes. Deep. Brown. Wet. And around her neck, a single red feather. Tied with sinew. Nita's feather. The horse lowered her head. Nudged his palm. Soft. Gentle. As if she'd been waiting. Kawa reached out. Let his fingers brush her muzzle. And for the first time in years, he wept. Not from rage. Not from grief. From love. That had survived. Even after death. The horse turned. Walked slowly into the dusk. And waited. Just beyond the threshold. Kawa followed. Without looking back. The chapel collapsed behind him. Not from wind. Not from rot. But because the earth remembered. And it was tired. Of men. They say the land doesn't forget. It just waits. And when the wind dies, and the coyotes stop howling, and the last star fades behind the mesquite, it remembers everything. The water still drips. From the same crack in the black basalt where Cowboy found it that day. Where Nita died. Where bread fell into dust and silence swallowed a girl's last breath. No one comes anymore. Not soldiers. Not settlers. Not even the Navajo or the Hopi, who once traded with her people. The canyon is marked now, not by maps, but by whispers. Children are told not to go there after sunset. Bad spirits, their grandmothers say. Bad memories. But sometimes, on nights when the moon hangs low and silver as a bullet casing, a figure walks. Barefoot. Silent. Cloaked in shadow. He doesn't carry a gun. Doesn't wear a hat. Just a frayed coat stitched with feathers, each one red, each one from a different bird, each one tied with sinew that never rotted. Some say he's the last of the Apache scouts. Others say he's the ghost of a boy who loved too hard. A few claim they've seen him kneel at the rock, cup his hands beneath the drip, and drink slowly, like he's tasting his sister's voice. The water doesn't run like it used to. It falls slower now. One drop every minute. But it never stops. And if you press your ear to the stone at dawn, you can hear it. Not the splash. Not the echo. But a hum. Soft. Faint. Like a lullaby sung in a language no one speaks anymore. Bread is life, water is love, every morning, someone leaves something at the base of the rock. A clay cup. Filled with fresh water. Sometimes, a loaf of bread. Wrapped in calico. Always untouched. No footprints lead to it. No tracks lead away. But the cup is always full. And the bread, warm. As if baked only hours before. In Hollow Creek, old Alara still bakes. She's 93 now. Bent like a willow branch. Eyes clouded, hands trembling. But she still wakes before sunrise. Still measures flour by memory. Still wraps the loaves in that same calico. One for the living. One for the dead. She leaves them on her porch. And every night, when the wind carries the scent of wheat through the valley, she closes her eyes. And smiles. Because she knows. He's still walking. Still watching. Still remembering. Last spring, a young soldier passed through, fresh from Fort Bowie. Young enough to believe in medals, not ghosts. He heard the stories. Laughed at them. Said, "Ain't no spirit gonna haunt me." That night, he camped near the canyon. Woke screaming at dawn. His boots were gone. His canteen. Full. Water clear. Tasted sweet. On his chest, resting like a gift, a single red feather. And carved into the bark of the nearest tree, "I gave you water. You gave me death. Now I give you peace." He rode out that same hour. Never spoke of it again. But he left the army. Became a teacher. Taught children how to read. How to pray. How to offer bread, even to those who don't deserve it. Because he learned. Mercy isn't given because someone is worthy. It's given because someone else was brave enough to offer it first. The years roll on. The railroad came. Then went. The towns rose. Then crumbled. The desert swallowed them all. But the water? It still drips. And the bread? Still appears. Sometimes, on quiet nights, travelers swear they see him. A man standing at the edge of the dunes. Watching. Not with hate. Not with vengeance. But with sorrow. And something deeper. Something holy. A kind of love that refused to die. They say if you sit beside the rock at dusk, and whisper your deepest regret, the wind will answer. Not in words. In silence. In warmth. In the scent of baking bread. And if you're lucky, if you've lived long enough to know what loss really means, you'll feel a hand. Not yours. Not real. But gentle. Like a mother tucking a blanket around a child. Or a sister placing bread in your palm. And you'll understand. He didn't come for revenge. He came to remind us. That kindness is sacred. That thirst is cruel. That blood stains the earth, but bread? Bread rises again. Even after the fire. Even after the war. Even after the world forgets your name. So if you ever find yourself lost in the Gila, starving, broken, afraid, look for the crack in the rock. Kneel. Drink. And leave something behind. A cup. A prayer. A piece of your heart. Because somewhere, in the dust between heaven and hell, a brother still walks. And he's waiting. For you. To remember. To forgive. To be human. The water still drips. One drop. Then another. And if you listen close, when the wind dies. And the coyotes fall silent. You'll hear it. Not a cry. Not a scream. Just a whisper. Soft. Sweet. Forever. I gave you water. You gave me death. Now I give you peace.